Anybody with a dog probably spends a lot of time talking to them, whether that's sharing affection, giving them commands, scolding them, or squishing their adorable faces and saying, "Who's a good girl?" Anyone else have cute aggression? You know, that bizarre feeling that takes over when something is just so cute that you want to squeeze it so hard. Okay, maybe it's just me. How do you interact with your pup?
Hi, Layla. That's my good girl.
We do have our conversations. I've learned a few stern looks make a big difference.
Hey, buddy boy, da, 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 you know, like just gibberish.
To be honest, she's not really vocal. She doesn't bark or growl. She just stares with her eyes and wags her tail a lot.
Oh, River, look at your beautiful velvet ears.
When I first come home from work and he's doing the shaking thing, and we call it the Barkley Boogie, You doing the Barkley Boogie? You doing the Barkley Boogie?
Aw, that's precious. Do you ever wonder what's going on in your dog's head? Like, what would they say if they could talk? What would their voice sound like?
Hello, my name's Layla. What's your name?
Sometimes he's like, "Hey, I really need to go, pay attention here."
It's kind of a high-pitched Mickey Mouse voice, If he responds, he'll respond like this. Or like, "Barkley, why do you chase so many things?" We go, "'Cause I'm a lab retriever. I'm supposed to chase stuff."
She'd be like, "Meow, meow, let me get a pork chop. Layla, let me get a pork chop."
Obviously, dogs don't talk to us the way our human best friends do. But what if they could? What if we could take human-canine communication to the next level and learn how to better understand each other?
I would love it.
The only time I think I would like to know exactly what he's thinking was if he was in pain.
I'd be willing to pay $100 just to see what she had to say, or more if I had it.
I think she would always talk about food, though.
I'd like to know, but sometimes I think it would be like an incessant chatter, like, "Hey, she pushed me," or "Hey, he's in my spot."
Well, I'm afraid he might tell what I've been telling him.
That's too much information.
From the Stowers Institute for Medical Research and KCUR studios in Kansas City, this is Seeking a Scientist, a podcast where science fiction meets reality. I'm Dr. Kate Biberdorf, aka Kate the Chemist, and in this episode, we're asking the questions: how much can we really communicate with dogs? How closely are they listening to our voices and watching our movements? And how much does that nature versus nurture piece fit into the equation?
Bottom line, dogs can absolutely communicate with humans.
Love you. I love you. Good girl.
Often we pigeonhole into verbal spoken language, but actually communication is so much more than that.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Hello? Hello? Are you a dog?
Yes!
I am also a dog.
All right!
Yeah!
We're dogs!
Yeah, we're dogs.
We're dogs that live near each other.
Even if you're not a dog person, I want you to bear with me here and think about the bigger picture. Because this episode is really about the possibility of enhancing human communication with any other species, which is a pretty wild concept if you think about it. Scientists anticipate looking into this idea with other animals like dolphins, whales, and elephants. Yes, elephants. But today, we're starting with man's best friend. And quick little life update. Unfortunately, I lost both of my senior dogs last year. Betty and Dort are up in doggy heaven now, but during their prime, it often seemed like they knew exactly what I was thinking. Apart from a few times when it felt like our communication was way off, something I know I'm not alone in. Yet, at the end of the day, I'd like to think that my dogs got me, which might be true to a point. Scientists are already studying dogs and the humans that work with dogs, from the border collies that race through agility courses to the Anatolian shepherd dogs that protect livestock overnight, or even the Labrador retrievers that go duck hunting in the freezing cold rain. We've learned that it's possible to train pups to do a multitude of tasks. And in most cases, they're happy to do it. These animals are deeply connected to their humans. They know exactly what we're asking them to do.
What we've learned is that in a lot of ways, it seems like our dogs are kind of biologically prepared to communicate with us.
That's Emily Bray, the owner of a 2-year-old dog named Milano.
So I have a golden retriever Bernese Mountain Dog mix. Highly recommend. Sweetest temperament.
She's a dog lover, like me, and an assistant professor of human-animal interaction at the University of Arizona. Friends, she has hands down the best job in the entire world because she spends all day, every day, playing with puppies. Have you always been interested in animals, dogs specifically?
Yeah, I would say so. I grew up in a house with 2 veterinarians, so we've always had pet dogs. And when I went to college, it just so happened that a couple years prior, a canine cognition center had been opened at the university that I went to. So I was able to kind of jump right in first out of just personal interest.
Emily has a PhD in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, and now in Arizona, she's studying how well humans can communicate ideas to canines, both verbally and non-verbally. Speaking, listening, reading, and writing are all considered to be verbal communication skills. If we try to communicate through eye contact, pointing, or facial expressions, we're taking advantage of non-verbal communication. Dogs do the same thing. For example, if a dog makes this sound, they're anxious and possibly a little afraid. But if they make this sound, the dog is angry and aggressive and does not want to play. But what do you think it means if a dog wags its tail? If you guess that the dog is happy, I don't blame you at all. But a study at the University of Trieste on 30 pet dogs of varying breeds suggests there might be more to it. Listen to this. Dog tail wags aren't symmetrical. If a dog wags its tail more toward the right, it means something positive is happening, like they're playing with their owner. An asymmetrical left tail wag indicates a negative experience. If that's coupled with lip licking or eye contact avoidance, know that the dog is experiencing discomfort. And the position of the tail matters too. According to the American Kennel Club, the general rule is the higher the tail, the more assertive the dog. So, if a dog's tail is tucked between their legs, they're feeling shy and probably want some space. If the tail is pointed straight up in the air, they're feeling confident and possibly a little aggressive. But that's not always the case for hackles. Those are the tiny hairs that stick straight up along the spine of the dog. Raised hackles can indicate a stressed dog, but some canines do this whenever they're aroused. Dogs don't seem to have any control over this behavior. It's kind of like when humans get goosebumps. If a dog shows you their belly, it's probably because they like you and want some pets. But be warned, this is also a sign of submission, and puppies may lose control of their bladders. So, as far as I'm concerned, humans have done a decent job of learning the meaning of dog barks and behaviors, but how much can dogs really interpret our verbal and nonverbal cues? Emily says canines are surprisingly good at it, but there are layers to it. So let's start with this concept of measuring a dog's intelligence. What makes a smart dog? According to Dr. Stanley Coren, an emeritus psychology professor from the University of British Columbia and author of the book, The Intelligence of Dogs, canine intellect can be measured by scoring the dog's instinct, adaptive problem-solving skills, and what he calls school learning. Basically, how much a dog can learn from a human. With these parameters, Border Collies are considered to be the smartest dogs, and Poodles are number 2. German Shepherds are ranked 3rd, Golden Retrievers are 4th, and Dobermans come in at number 5. But still, the question remains, to what extent can dogs actually understand what we're trying to teach them?
We know that dogs can learn words, and Chaser is a famous Border Collie. I don't know if you're familiar.
I was not.
Chaser knew over 1,000 nouns.
Well, a famous four-legged Spartanburg icon has passed away. Chaser has been called the world's smartest dog. She's appeared on network television and in magazines all over the world.
And then there was Rico, who is also a very famous Border Collie. But Rico could do what developmental psychologists would call fast mapping. And this is, I think, super fascinating because it basically is the process of inferring the name of a novel item by exclusion learning and then being able to go retrieve that item. So if you had a bunch of dog toys out and there was the banana and the t-shirt and you wanted him to learn slipper, if you said, go get the slipper, he could do that. And that's actually really cool.
I mean, I wouldn't say no if my dog wanted to fetch slippers for me.
So there's a group in Hungary that has been doing what they call it a genius dog study.
So how does the challenge work? In the first stage, each dog receives a box with 6 toys and has 6 days to learn their names.
And they've been actively searching out, like, was this a 2-time fluke, or how common is it that dogs, border collies or otherwise, can do this? And they've been able to find these genius dogs.
The method of exclusion is wild to me. When presented with a novel object within a group of known objects, humans, dogs, apes, monkeys, and birds are all capable of matching the new object to the new name. But not all dogs. I taught my girls how to sit, lay down, roll over, how to dance. I even taught my big 80-pound Rottweiler Golden Retriever mix how to stand on her back legs and give me a kiss. But there is no chance that she would have ever been able to do that slipper trick. So this got me thinking about the average pet dog and how much they're able to communicate with their owners.
You'll often hear people say, my dog knows when it's done something bad, and it has this really guilty look about them. And so Alexandra Horowitz studied this question, where basically she kind of manipulated if the dog actually misbehaved or not, and then what the owner thought the dog did, because the owner was out of the room. And really what it is that it's less about their own behavior and more about reading the human's behavior. So I think it actually does speak to this communication piece. So really, you see that guilty look more when the owner is like scolding and thinking that the dog did something wrong, whether or not they actually did something wrong. And it's them reading their humans' cues, right? And humans and dogs need to really read each other's cues and signals, whether that be through spoken commands on the part of the human or behavior on the part of the dog. And so just because it's not verbal doesn't mean that it's not communication.
Exactly. Have you ever seen a couple look at each other from across the room? They can have an entire conversation through their eyes without uttering a single word. That being said, if you use your voice, the tone really does matter. Imagine if I say this sentence to my husband after dinner. Are you done with your plate? Or, are you done with your plate? One is said in a kind, happy tone. I'm offering to pick up his plate and put it into the dishwasher. The other is said by the angry wife who is sick of cleaning up after her husband. And just like humans, dogs can also tell what our different tones mean.
We did a study with actually both pet dogs and service dogs, looking at how the experimenter's level of arousal, level of excitement impacted how the dog then went on to solve the problem. And this was one of those classic, we didn't know it was going to be a study until it became a study. We were kind of messing up in a different study of like, oh, our enthusiasm, especially me, I'm kind of an enthusiastic person. So it's like, oh, when I'm acting this way, that impacts how the dog is going to respond. We learned that that's something that should be standardized in tasks. But anyway, in the study in question, we specifically on purpose varied how excited we were when addressing the dogs, and that had a direct impact on their ability to solve a problem, even if they had successfully solved the problem before in a different condition. If you were not enthusiastic enough for the service dogs or were too enthusiastic for the pet dogs, it made it that much more difficult for them to solve a problem that they should be able to solve.
So let me get that right. So pet dogs, when we were enthusiastic, they had a harder time solving it. But for the service dogs, when we were enthusiastic, that kicked them into a higher gear. Is that right?
So our hypothesis is that they're coming to the table with a different baseline level of excitement, enthusiasm, whatever you want to call it. And so we actually did quantify that by looking at the rate of their tail wagging in the videos. And so we know that during the actual manipulation, they're equally excited because their tails are wagging at similar rates. However, if you look at their tail wagging rate when they just enter the room before they know what's going to happen, pet dogs are wagging their tails at like twice the rate as the service dogs.
Twice the rate. That's a lot.
Yeah, so they're just in general much more excited. And so I think they're kind of already at an ideal problem-solving level of enthusiasm. And so if you up the ante, that's just going to push them over the cliff. Whereas the service dogs almost need that extra boost to be like, oh, okay, you're asking something of me. Got it. So obviously, these are broad generalizations.
That totally registers for me. If I was excited, my dogs were excited. Neither of them would have any interest in working on a puzzle if I was jumping up and down and screaming. They would both be right there with me, bouncing off the walls. But service dogs are different. And before I go any further into the research, allow me to break down the different types of canines we'll discuss in this episode. There's pet dogs, sometimes called civilian dogs, and then there's working dogs, service dogs, and guide dogs. The 3 breeds I mentioned earlier, Border Collies, Anatolian Shepherds, and Retrievers, are all considered to be working dogs. They are trying to do one task: run the agility course, guard the sheep, bring back the duck. If as they get older, it turns out that they're not so great as working dogs, these pups will often retire to the backyard pool and become regular old pet dogs. Or they could potentially become a service dog or a guide dog. Now, these types of canines are similar in that they are trained to work with one human to assist with a number of different unique tasks. But even though they both need to be able to understand their handler's cues perfectly, their personality requirements are quite different. For example, service dogs need to be submissive and obey every command from their owner. But guide dogs need to have a mind of their own. If their blind human tells them to walk into a busy street, the guide dog needs to see the hand at the crosswalk and stop their handler.
So a guide dog is basically, when they're placed, asked to think very independently, because they are going to be privy to information that their handler is not privy to. And so they often have to make decisions that it's not being directly influenced by the handler, and sometimes it's in direct contradiction. So you'll hear of this concept called willful disobedience. So it's complicated, right? Because they know what they need to do, and the handler might be telling them, go, go, but they can see what the handler cannot. And so they need to know in that instance, but not in others, to not do that. And so that's a very independent problem-solving skill. Service dogs, on the other hand, they're, again, paired with people with mobility disabilities or potentially veterans with PTSD. And so in these situations, the handler can see. And really what is being asked of the dog is for them to be very attentive to the handler and kind of at the ready to perform any command that's being asked of them. So in that sense, they're very dependent on humans, and they need to be very focused on humans.
They do. That makes a lot of sense to me. The willful, what did you say? Willful disobedience? Is that what
willful disobedience, yes.
Willful disobedience. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me because like they do. They can see they have extra data that they're processing and they need to keep their handlers safe. If we take a step back, like how, what's the big picture here? What can we do with this research?
What we find can quite literally improve the lives of dogs and people. And my research really helps us understand the environments and circumstances under which these dogs do their best problem solving, makes them comfortable in public places, how they're best able to communicate with us. And then the hope is that that ultimately translates into making the service dog process more effective and efficient and just beneficial to people and the dogs.
So Emily took the lead on a study to discover just how early this communication and bond with humans could be made, and if it had anything to do with genetics, which meant spending a lot more time with teeny tiny puppies. Emily set up what the media has referred to as a puppy pointing study to quantify just how much service dogs and their puppies understand when we're trying to communicate with them. To visualize this experiment, picture 2 solo cups that have a piece of kibble taped to the inside of each cup. Now, flip the cups over and put an extra piece of kibble under one of the 2 cups. First, to establish a baseline, they brought in an 8-week-old golden retriever puppy into the room and watched what happened.
So in this study, we basically had them participate in 4 different tasks of social cognition, which is what we know is really special about adult dogs. And so we wanted to look even earlier in the lifespan and see, is this a skill that puppies have from very early on? So we actually put the cups out, we get the puppy's attention, and then we just say, okay, find the food. And it's kind of a free-for-all. They can choose whichever cup they want. What we see in practice is that I'm not kidding when I say we've done this with thousands of dogs, and they are at 50%, which is chance, and that means they guess in this scenario.
What Emily really wanted to know was whether puppies could pick up on social cues from humans, process them, and then make a decision about what to do next.
Basically, we hide a treat under one in a way that the puppy cannot see where we hid it. And then we give them a hint in that we point to the correct cup and we see, are they able to use our social cue to find the treat?
They found that when a scientist pointed to the special solo cup, the tiny puppy would go to that cup 70% of the time.
They can follow the point, and so that, to me, that's really convincing evidence. And so when you ask if dogs communicate, I think the answer is 1,000%, absolutely. I think often we pigeonhole into verbal spoken language, but actually communication is so much more than that, right? Whether it be their body language or their vocalizations.
What I appreciate about this study is that the scientists acknowledged that the human in the room could potentially affect the results of the experiment. What would happen if they swapped an extroverted scientist out for an introverted scientist? Or better yet, what if they removed the scientist from the equation completely? To test this, they decided to replace the pointing scientist with a little yellow wooden block that the puppy had never seen before.
The idea is that we put it in a social context by holding it, showing it to the puppy, talking to them in a high-pitched voice, and then we place that marker next to the correct cup. And that's their hint during the marker cue trials. And again, we see that they're really good at this.
She didn't even mention my favorite part of the experiment. It actually works best on the very first iteration. The more times they perform the experiment, the worse it gets, which means the puppy isn't learning. The scientist is communicating with the puppy during the very first interaction. As the experiment proceeds, the puppy cares less about the scientist, almost like they're saying, been there, done that. Is this their first sign of willful disobedience? I think so. Hypothetically, if we swapped out a puppy for a chimp or a wolf, how do you think they would do?
Yes, so we have done this. With chimps, it's interesting because they're actually not as good at following our pointing cues. Again, if you do thousands of trials, they can learn, but it's not something that appears to come naturally to them. And then wolves, we actually had a study where we went and worked with hand-reared wolves and tested them on exactly the same tasks.
They found that the wolves were equally as good at physical reasoning tasks, but they fell short when it came to picking up on our nonverbal communication. So why are dogs different? Well, one idea is that humans began domesticating puppies 36,000 years ago, and after a short 20,000 years of coexisting, they morphed into being our happy little sidekicks. So does that mean that they are predisposed to follow our social cues? Well, to answer that question, we have to look at the genetics. So fortunately for Emily, she has direct access to organizations like Canine Companions, a nonprofit group that breeds docile service dogs, trains them, and then donates them to people in need. Their dogs are either Labrador retrievers or golden retrievers or a cross between the two breeds. And because they purpose breed service dogs from carefully selected dog mamas, they know all about the genetics of the puppies in their program.
And so what's really cool about that is that we can look at heritability of a trait. Or in other words, how much of the variation that we see is attributable to genetics as compared to the environment. And what we find is that, especially for a cognitive trait, those things are about 40% heritable.
So these cognitive traits, like following a point or gazing to a human when we're speaking in a high-pitched voice, are passed from parent to offspring 40% of the time. This is such a large number that it suggests that dogs are biologically prepared for communication with us, and that humans likely selected for it over the course of domestication. However, every dog, just like every human, is different. Take my sister and me. We have the exact same parents, and yet we have opposite communication styles. I'm blunt, and I like to get to the point, and my sister, God bless her, cares a lot about other people's feelings and chooses her words carefully. My half-brother is somewhere in between. So this got me thinking, how does nature versus nurture fit into all of this? Can dog mamas affect how connected their puppies will be to their future human handlers? Emily says yes.
Yeah, so we partnered with the Seeing Eye, which is the oldest guide dog school in the United States. Kind of the overarching question from an applied sense is always, how does this impact their ability to be a working guide dog or a working service dog? So my goal was always to do a longitudinal study where we would spend, about 6 months watch these litters being born, observe them with their mothers over the first 3 weeks of life, and then follow up with those puppies. We tested them actually when they were about 7 weeks old on some behavioral tests, and then again when they entered training around a year and a half.
And what did you find? I mean, so it seems like there's something about horizontal versus vertical feeding. Was that on your radar before you started looking at the tapes?
Initially, I was just trying to figure out how do we quantify maternal style. So it's things like time spent in proximity. So when the puppies are born, they're born into these, they're literally kiddie pools because they can't climb out yet, but the mother can easily hop in or hop out. But what's great about that is there's real variation in terms of the amount of time that the mother wants to spend with her puppies. So we have very quantifiable differences in terms of time spent in proximity, i.e. in the pool or not, time spent nursing, time spent licking and grooming the puppies. So one thing that we noticed when watching back these hours and hours of puppy videos was that some of the mothers were inclined to nurse their puppies just laying sacked out. So they're on their side, their belly is exposed, the puppies kind of have easy access to the milk bar, whereas other mothers might be sitting or standing. And that makes it a little bit more difficult for the puppies. So we tracked all of that in our coding program. And what we found at the end of all of this was that there were some strong associations between the maternal style that these puppies were experiencing in early life and their later outcome as a guide. And so kind of universally, when you look at maternal style as a whole, it was actually the more hands-off mothers that were producing guides, working guide dogs.
A few years later, when Emily started working with service dogs, she found the exact opposite results. See, service dogs come from the helicopter moms of the dog world. They are more stressed as measured by their high cortisol levels, and they feed on their side, sack out. But guide dogs, they need to be more independent, which is why they are more likely to come from the more hands-off moms. They're the mamas who take every opportunity to jump out of the kiddie pool. They feed vertically and let their pups do their own thing. They have much lower baseline cortisol levels. That being said, both types of dogs can communicate with humans starting as early as 8 weeks old.
The evidence would suggest that a lack of maternal style is promoting independence, whereas more maternal style is promoting interest in humans.
Currently, Canine Companions, the nonprofit that breeds service dogs, only has a 55% success rate. And Emily shared with me that the service dogs that don't make it are usually only released due to behavioral reasons, not because they can't understand us. Things like inappropriate vocalizations or being too assertive can all be used to dismiss a dog. But they can also fail out of the program for having allergies or cataracts or anxiety. You can't have a nervous pup for a service dog. They need to be comfortable with eye contact and being close, both physically and emotionally, to their special human. But let's say you don't have a working dog, or a guide dog, or a service dog. What if you just have a cutie patootie pitty from the pound? If we are trying to talk to our dog and train our dog and communicate with our dog, what have you learned and what advice do you have, if any, for our listeners?
I think actually they often do a better job of reading us than we do of them. And so I think that is a good place to start. Again, kind of, I feel like this is a theme, right? Observe, watch, see what your dog is doing. And, you know, I feel like that is a lot of what I like to call setting your dog up for success. And so that might look like reading their cues. They might be subtle of like signs of, oh, they're a little stressed out right now if you're in a certain situation. Obviously, they don't have language, but they have bodies, they have vocalizations. And when they are, you know, moving their tails or panting or licking their lips or moving their ears, that all means something. And so just being more in tune with that. And then also how what you're doing is impacting them.
Maybe we have it all backwards. Maybe humans need to do a better job of interpreting dog behavior. If that's the case, here are a few more tips, but please remember that every dog is different. Number 1, if the ears are tucked back and the tail is between the legs, the dog is scared. Only reassure them if you have a known positive relationship with the animal. Number 2, if a dog licks their lips when food is not present, they are unsure. Proceed with caution. Number 3, when a puppy puts its butt in the air and its elbows on the ground, or if it lifts one paw in the air, almost like they want to shake your hand from a standing position, it's playtime. Prepare to be pounced. Okay, that's it for now. The last thing I'll leave you with is some rapid-fire dog questions. Do you have a favorite movie about dogs or animals?
Best in Show.
That is such a good one. I forgot about that one.
God loves a terrier.
Okay, Great Dane or Chihuahua?
Great Dane.
Orca or lion?
Orca.
Socks or slippers?
Socks. Well, no, slippers. Slippers. I changed my mind. Slippers.
Good. I love it. Okay. Last but not least, and this is just because I'm a chemist, I have to know, do you happen to have a favorite element by any chance?
No.
Okay, that's okay. You're honest. I appreciate it. I just gotta ask. Thank you so much for listening to Seeking a Scientist, and special thanks to everyone who has been writing reviews and sharing this podcast with their friends. It really does help us celebrate badass scientists like Emily and get them that standing ovation they so deserve. If you want to connect with us, send us your ideas, your science questions or feedback, or even just a note to tell us how you communicate with your dog. You can reach us via email or send a voice memo to kate@seekingascientist.org. Seeking a Scientist is a production of KCUR Studios in Kansas City, made possible with support from the Stowers Institute for Medical Research, where scientists work to accelerate our understanding of human health and disease. It's hosted by me, Dr. Kate Biberdorf, aka Kate the Chemist. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok @Kate the Chemist, or the pod at Seeking a Sci Pod. Our senior producer is Suzanne Hogan, our editor is Mackenzie Martin, and our digital editor is Gabe Rosenberg. This episode was mixed by Suzanne Hogan. A huge thank you to David McKeel and Anna Schmidt, who talked to you and your dogs for this episode. And a special thanks as always to the team at KCUR Studios, Byron Love and Genevieve DesMarteau. You heard some very cute clips this episode from the BBC Sound Effects Library, YouTube user @Guardia23, Scooby-Doo Where Are You?, Lady and the Tramp, Family Guy, Animal Wise, and #Studio, WHNS Fox Carolina News, Genius Dog Challenge, and Best in Show. Our original theme music is by The Coma Calling, and you heard additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Stay nerdy, my friends.